Let's go straight into it. I want to thank Acnis for sending the KK3 Standard for review. Of course, that has no impact whatsoever on my opinions, and they get to see the video at the same time as everybody else. Now, this is not the first GuliKit controller that I've reviewed on this channel, and it won't be the last, and it's definitely not the first one of this exact line, the KK3 or King Kong 3. In fact, this is the third controller in the collection. We had the KK3 Max first, then the KK3 Pro, and now the KK3 Standard. Now, before we go any further, one thing that's interesting with this one is that rather than going from a baseline and improving over time with the new products, this one is kind of going about it backwards. However, there is one specific aspect that is a net advantage over the previous models, or at least so it should be, but we'll definitely talk about that. So make sure to stay tuned till the end to know my inputs. So let's just go quickly over the box and the unboxing. By the way, is only available in this color. Usually they have different options. For this one, that's what you get. On the back, it mentions some of the specs. You have a 950 milliamp hour battery, which I'd say is above average for the third-party controller market. I don't have the exact time, unfortunately, but I do expect that this is a controller that would last a fairly long time before you need to charge it again. In the box, we have a USB-C to USB-A cable, an instruction booklet, and the controller itself. We'll talk about what makes this one different than the others right after going over the specs, my impressions, and how testing this specific one felt like. So in terms of buttons, we have a membrane, fairly stiff with the face buttons, very pleasant, and an almost flat button, which is also something that we don't see a whole lot. Usually they're more curved. And we also have what appears to be a fairly matte to eggshell kind of feel and look to the button. They're not glossy like a lot of buttons that we find on the market. The D-pad has what I would also consider to be a membrane, but I'm pretty sure it's their patented membrane / tactile button, which is a tactile mechanism with a membrane button underneath. And it feels somewhere in between. It's quite nice. Think a membrane that pushes back very quickly, like it's a very stiff membrane. Actually, you know what? Let's do a sound test both for face buttons and D-pad. So these are the face buttons. And this is the D-pad. The D-pad also has a center pivot, which is quite audible. Shoulder buttons are tactile but very muted, but also very bouncy. I quite like the feel of them. Triggers are analog, of course. Your sticks are TMR, they click, and you have also stiff membrane on your function buttons, probably dome buttons. Up top, you have the one to switch your modes, and then the one to put yourself in pairing. So the modes you have is the switch mode, Windows, which is going to be X input. You have the Android and iOS. Now, the one I did test on iOS, it actually worked. That one is the input when used wired, which quite surprised me, but when using wireless, it will be X input, which is the reason why it works on iOS. And then the D at the end is really D input. One thing for sure, you can definitely use this controller on PC, Mac, iOS, Android, Steam Deck. You might just have to jump from one mode to another, and there are some slight performance differences in the modes. Now, another thing, if you are familiar with the other models in the list, I feel it's necessary to address that you don't have extra back buttons, hair trigger, or anything like that. So we're really keeping this controller to a basic approach. Basically, the foundations, the necessities that you would have from most, to not say every game controller nowadays. You no longer have RGB around the rings, which is the case with some other previous models. Now, you still have RGB here, which will let you know if you are charging and if your controller is charged. So while charging, it's orange. While fully charged, it's green. In terms of ergonomics, the GuliKit controllers feel very nice, and that one is no exception. I personally preferred the feel of the plastic, which has just a little bit of grittiness versus the KK3 Max that feels more like velvety. It's kind of weird to describe. Personally, I find that this is a better grip. You do have little dots in the back as well to give you a tight hold on your controller. Overall, a very good feeling and very much Xbox-like. You have little rings around the sticks which have a texture and will help you for control. Personally, they're not my favorite type of sticks, but they're concave, something that I personally prefer, and having the metal rings around them, it will prevent any scuffs and any skidding issues. Now, you do have gyro on the controller, but gyro will only work when using the Nintendo Switch. However, if you are playing on PC and you would like to have gyro, technically there's a bit of a a hack, if you will, where using Steam input, as long as you put it in the Nintendo Switch controller, you are able to leverage the gyro data to be translated by Steam input. In terms of rumble, what we have is a pretty standard grip, no trigger, but standard grip rumble, rotary, so it feels nice. I mean, it feels about on par with what you have from first-party rumble rotary motor controllers, such as the Xbox Series controller. With all of that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about my testings. I took this controller into Aimlabs, and one of the key components of this product is, of course, the sticks, that they use TMR, which is an improved version of Hall Effect. So if you've been hearing about Hall Effect sticks, you have the same benefits. They don't drift, they have higher precision, and overall have higher reliability versus the older quote-unquote technology, ALPS, that you have in first-party controllers. So what we have here is not Hall Effect, but it does employ the same technology, being that it uses magnets to get the readings, but it uses an improved version of it called TMR. And TMR has two very noticeable advantages over Hall Effect. Number one is it utilizes less electricity. It'll allow for a controller that will last longer over the lifespan of the battery until you need to charge it again. And also, it has a more linear progression to your sticks. That said, there is still algorithm into play, there is still stick curve into play, and when testing this one into Aimlabs, I was shocked, and not in the right way. While you can feel that you have sticks that have extremely good responsiveness, they crank it to such a high degree so quickly. The stick is so aggressive in its curve that you will juke left and right without even realizing that you pushed your stick. It's very fast acting. I think the best way for me to describe this is, think of buying a new mouse where you have like up to 12,000 DPI and you crank it all the way, but you leave the sensitivity of your game at default. It's not going to be a pleasant experience. Now, what you could do in most cases, if you want to play with a mouse with high DPI, is that you could drastically lower the sensitivity in your game. It's not so much that the sticks are not good in terms of like the physical aspect of them. They're actually quite nice, and the sensor is above average in terms of step resolution, but depending on the modes, you're gonna get different step resolutions. That was a little strange for me to see, but anyways, I'm getting a little sidetracked here. And so by reducing the sensitivity, you still get that very smoothness, response time with your controller, and responsiveness in terms of the graduality of your sticks, but you get what feels like a curve that is far less aggressive. Now, the problem with doing that is that while you will get a much smoother experience at the inner radius of your sticks, it will not ramp up as much as it would on the outer radius of your sticks. And that basically means that while you will improve aiming in some situations, when having to fast, rapid action turn around, it will not be as efficient. It's a trade-off to better balance the curvature of the stick. So that's why I don't usually do these kinds of things, right? Because they come with a caveat where if the manufacturer gives us great tweaking right off the bat, we'll have overall a superior experience. And I'm sorry to say it, in my opinion, that's not the case here. Moving on to the next test, the D-pad. And that is such a strength on GuliKit's controllers, because you have what is effectively a rounded corner and you can really go at it with your thumb. It's not gonna hurt. And that's a little surprising to me because it's not necessarily my favorite shape, but I think it's a mix of the texture that they have on the D-pad, which is different than the shell, by the way. That one is smoother with the rounded edges. It really makes it easy to glide on the D-pad, so much so that I wouldn't require a glove for this product. I think it does a great job at just giving you a positive experience overall. And yeah, I mean, playing Street Fighter with this controller is something that I liked. There are some D-pads out there that I would favor over this one, but I would say easily that this is a B in terms of rating, which you could argue that there's better, and I will definitely agree that there is, but what you have here, considering the price point, is overall very well balanced with the price point and the rest of the controller. So before moving to the conclusion, conclusion, I want to thank Acnis for sending this product for review, which, by the way, if you are interested in having one, you can find them on Amazon for $39.99. But there's also the KK3 Pro and KK3 Max, which is why I mentioned this, because I do want to raise some differences between the other two models in the line before drawing my conclusion. So this is my KK3 Max and this is my KK3 Pro. I mean, looking at all three of them at the same time, they look almost identical. There's a few differences. The shell feels different on the Max. The Pro feels a little more gritty. That one has hair triggers, whereas the other ones do not. But the hair trigger is not necessarily the tightest in terms of how little that it pushes it. So it's not the best hair trigger. Not that they're bad or anything. Just if you want something that is fast action, probably not the best one on the market. They both have the option to have 4 extra paddles, but the Max comes with 4, actually 6 paddles even, whereas the Pro comes with 2. D-pad is about the same. They have glossy buttons. And in terms of modes, these two support dongle as well as a 1000 Hz pulling rate. All in all, without getting too much in detail, because I have a review for the KK3 Max, I have a review for the KK3 Pro. They'll be in my description box if ever you're interested. Once I reviewed the Pro, I ultimately came to the conclusion that, in my opinion, this is a better value than the KK3 Max, because you do lose a couple of things, but the few things that you lose, I feel, are not as important. So ultimately, you get a very concise, very compelling product proposition with the KK3 Pro versus the KK3 Max, considering the $20 difference. Now, when we go to the KK3 Standard, personally, I don't think it is as compelling. In fact, I don't really feel like I should recommend this controller. While yes, you do have TMR, and that is definitely by far the biggest appeal on paper with this controller, I also feel like it is nowhere near on par to what other experience I've had that are TMR. So what I'm trying to say is here, if you buy this thinking, oh, well, I can finally get to try TMR, you will sort of cheat yourself out of an experience that is so much better elsewhere that do offer TMR sticks. And for that reason, I think it's not a valid motive to go for the KK3 Standard. And then when you take into consideration all the things that it strips down versus the KK3 Pro for $20, it's just not worth it. You don't have the dongle, you don't have the 1000 Hz pulling rate, you don't have as much shortcuts, which I'm not going to talk about. I'll put it on list because you have a few of them, but you have a lot less. You don't have the case that comes bundled with it. You don't have the extra buttons in the back. I mean, you don't have HD rumble. You have a lot less features on this controller, to the point that it's not so much that it's a bad controller. It's actually quite good. The low price market is so aggressive that there is, dare I say, a lot better for $40 US. My best advice is, if you want to get this, save 1 or 2 weeks for a little bit more and get that instead. Don't be fooled by the fact that it says it's TMR. The difference is not drastic enough that it justifies losing everything else that the KK3 Pro does. This is my honest and humble opinion. You may think differently. And if you do, let me know the reasons why you would go towards the Standard versus the Pro or versus the Max. Let's talk about it in the comment section. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me. As always, thank you very much for clicking and watching the video. As always, please consider doing all the YouTube things, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.